They say music is an universal language. Is it? I think psyche is an universal language. Music is the reflection of it. Of course, one learns how to write, compose, perhaps perform intelligent music. Sorry, I smirked when I said it. It's not that I belittle it. After all, it's the produce of the human brain, therefore it's humanity's spawn. It's not per se a reaction to a mood or a description of a mood. We call it perfect or pure music or whatever. But I think it's possible that in any expression there is something about oneself, not the producer but the receiver, who considers that, oh, this piece talks to me, means to me. I identify with it, without even to have to say the words. After all, it's just in the subconscious. And that can be also the acquired taste of so-called savant music. After all, a fugue can be in minor or in major, and we associate that with happiness and sadness for a very, very unnuanced way to describe it, because we have half major, half minor, full minor, or full major. And then we have something that is so meaningful to all of us, is that there is the point in the piece that we fall in love with the piece, or through the piece with its connection to us. Perhaps not at the first hearing, if it's a very complicated, perhaps, texture, but it doesn't really matter. I think people manage to guess more than they can say. After World War II, there was a movement of an universal language to avoid wars, Esperanto. People who talk to each other don't fight. One can say people who make music or listen to music together or produce music together. Also, even if there are politics in it, and I'm utterly unarmed for those, and I'm not even interested in shielding myself personally. But this petty point of view is nothing compared to the universality of the meaning of art as an elevation of our spirits. And I believe very much that we can decide that the organization of the sounds, the pulse rhythmic organization of their delay or display is most like the tempo which we choose when we play it, according to the state in which we are, within a limit, obviously. It's fascinating how different cultures treats death, love, the essential things in life. Yeah, I believe very much that the universality of music is not the music, but through the music. It's like as if this language, it's a link that hyphenates humanity. And the beauty of it compared to a language which the Esperanto didn't manage to, is that the universality of it is only on the surface, because we still hear it and understand it with our own environment and our own understanding of the meaning of what we think it connects us to. Even if the title suggests it, from a funeral march to a wedding march to a parading march, the sense of majestic display or intimate display is in the eye of the beholder, yeah. One can say that, like thinkers who organize their thoughts and give us the essence of their research, understanding, discovering, art, science, culture, whatever you want to call it, give us the best of their humanity through their brain and their soul. And in a way, it's for us to really believe that we also part of that link. As they say, the other half of the writer is the reader. So we could say that the active performer and the active listener are also the two sides of the piece, which has been sometimes used for other purposes because of its symbolic meaning. But again, we attach those meanings to it. Like we attach the beauty to a sunset or a sunrise, other than by the celestial mechanics. But most of the time, the first movement or the first section has the injection of intelligence through a thematic material or a leitmotivic material, if it's an opera, or even if it's a loose format of sonata form, but who knows? In other words, there is a drive and a meaning and a conviction, a statement. And very often the B section, the second theme, possibly the rondo with ABA, CA, DA, EA, the quality or persuasion of a lighter mood motif, like in Beethoven, Concerto Number 1, last movement, middle sections. We're so far from the ABA of the slow movement. Just to take a random example, but the theme in the first movement is so structured that it immediately sets the mood, the thought process as well, basically the soundscape. And the character finales or other movements really are to do with a point of view of a mood, whenever the thematic material usually brings us to the meaning of the statement. I guess the best way is to balance both. The produce of the mind, the expression of the soul, and then the playfulness of a dance, a song, an aria, or a rondo dance. To lighten up, perhaps that's the best balance of humanity, is to balance between the intensity of the brain production, which could be transformative or sometimes destructive, or for any person who is discovering an artwork, whichever genre of work, it doesn't have to be music, there is a moment of shock. I recall when I was a child, my parents brought me to the movie theater, no, to the real theater. And it was a Russian play about utter misery. And I recall coming out of it as a little child extremely angry, not at anybody except that I was uncomfortable mentioning it to my parents, what of course any child would say. Sorry if I sound cheesy by quoting myself, I was saying, they're lying to me. They're not dying, and they're not starving, and they're not all the things that they represent. Of course, it's a very small child. I was probably 5 or something. But I remember it bothered me a lot, because I felt like I was betrayed. I wanted to enter the rupture of disbelief of the English theater teaching, which I didn't know about, but I wanted to. But you do usually with a screen, which is in a way a shield for you as well, not to be overly involved. But when there is none, and you're just in front of people who act something which in fact is not who they are in present life, but they become so believable in their character, just like an interpretation becomes the piece. Perhaps more than the piece's interpretation in the mind of the composer. So there is a level of, if not lying, of course, it's childish of mine to have thought that, but deceiving, possibly, but alive. Perhaps that was a shock, because obviously when you anticipate to go to a concert hall, it's established before you go that they will recite something that was written by somebody else most of the time. Of course, storytelling is the essence of art, through image or shape or sound. And it involves a level of transformation, transfiguration, believable action, or even believable being. While I admire the most in composers their sincerity, people say it's simple. I don't know, perhaps the word is not misunderstood by some, perhaps for me, for sure, because I didn't know what it meant when they said play simple. All my teachers when I was younger. In fact, it's obvious. Obvious is goodness, obvious is sincerity, and vulnerable as such. Sometimes you can say some chromaticism are tortured, therefore that twisting of the material of the expression, therefore the psyche, is a way to manipulate the psyche of the listener to bring you to a certain state of mood. I don't know if that word exists, like in a Bach fugue, with chromaticism, elliptic avoidances of leading tone resolutions. And then you hear a same key, C sharp minor, waltz by Chopin. And it's charming. Obviously, we cannot say the fugue is charming, because by essence it's not supposed to be a mood. It's a thought, combined and cloned and blossomed, and in a way bewildering. How many more voices can you enter that can be in parliament with each other, with expression of tension and release and beauty through perhaps elevation of the spirit rather than the mood. compared to... And I don't know if that opposing the two type of music, probably it's a pointless point. Music, or these pieces, don't need me to display or explain or contrast them. It seems self-evident to any listener. It's almost like when my father wrote in his younger medical doctor years, a book about smoking, or therefore not smoking, because of the cancer dangers, and that was something which he told me with humor in the preface that he was writing. I remember many years ago, he said, it's a useless book. Those who do won't read it, because even if they want, it's hard to stop if they smoke. And those who don't won't read it either, because they know that they shouldn't, because they know the benefits they get of not smoking. Of course, again, it's another nuanced point of view, because there are innuendos and pressures, and so one doesn't have to explain to a listener the grace in the Waltz by Chopin, because it's in the Waltz by Chopin itself. The action, the gesture of the interval, the upper sixth going melodically around the perfect fifth is a hugging appoggiatura compared to the fugue's diminished fourth, which is an avoidance of the arrival of the tonic after the leading tone by the third and into it. So it creates a sense of tension and chromatic discomfort whenever. This is just an expression of openness, perhaps tenderness, love, whatever you want to put in it. But obviously it doesn't have the same gestural expression in the choice of the interval. If Bach had done, it would be more expressive outwards compared to if Chopin had done something chromatic. So there is, in the very choice of the interval, melodically, even if the fugue is not per se a melody because it doesn't have an accompaniment, but the voice, well, it's a melody, it's a part. It's funny how the more you try to explain music, the more you stumble on the words. Of course, there are writers with semantics who know exactly, in music even, how to express the words of the sounds. That it's almost like asking a ballerina to dance and explain the gestures and the dance moves she's doing. She's just doing them, and the grace that she puts into making them, regardless of the effort, which is supposed to be not shown in that type of art. Well, obviously it's different from a weightlifter, because you have to see the certain level of intensity of the effort, when in the ballerina not. But the ballerina is not supposed to speak, because the art is in the gesture. And the musician, unless there is a lyrics, well, many people consider anything a song, but that's not the case. Most of the classical music lovers know it's a piece, which literally means it's not a piece with words. Not it'll be a song with lyrics. So much is suggested in the design of the expression that doesn't need words to explain it. And when the teacher, or the musicologist, or the recording engineer, or some conference giver has to establish some facts analytically or musicologically or mood-wise, as I was saying in the beginning of our meeting today, it's almost like having a film by an art filmmaker and then having a comment over it while you watch it. That could be interesting analytically for cinematographic schools by saying, did you notice which way the camera zooms on the character to suggest, depict, like in a painter, the focus on subconscious or consciously things. But you can enjoy painting without an art specialist next to you, giving you a detailed explanation of the painting, as you can enjoy the piece, perhaps not all the complexity of pieces, just by what the vehicle directly for you. And perhaps you miss it if you cannot decipher it with your listener guides idea that sometimes program notes help. But yeah, generally, you first love and then you try to understand. That's something at the core of everything in music, I think. And then, of course, it leads you to study more things that you didn't think that you loved, that you start loving because you analyze them. Fine, that's not wrong. It's complementary. It's like life. You learn from mistakes, from heartbreaks, from disappointments, from betrayals, from having misbehaved oneself. Difficult to confess it, but to yourself or to oneself. I can say that exactly about interpretation between the composer and the teacher and the student and possibly the audience. So it's a lot of angles point of view. And somehow the flow of the music is like a river that we use as a vehicle to flow on. Denial is not a river in Egypt only. Yeah, it's also possibly an interpretation in denial. I don't want too much rubato. I don't want it to be too romantic. Or rather, I want it to be very this or very that, rather than I don't want too much of this, or usually people put too much of that and play it simple, as I said earlier, which in fact means probably just genuine. And what is genuine is difficult to be genuine. It's like an open field without shadows. Perhaps a dose of manipulation is part of the delay of the resolution, which brings you to expect it, and then when it comes you feel more moved. Perhaps finally find the point, like, oh, that's what it meant, or that's what it felt, or that's why it felt, therefore that's what it meant. Who knows? I don't. But I blabbermouth about it. Sometimes it's those self-evidences that are inside us in front of something that we feel more than understand, or understand more than feel, as an artwork. If we have to defend it, or if we have to perform it, or we have to listen to it, or watch it, or smell it, or imagine it, or daydream it. It's a vast subject. Oh well.